Hello and welcome to Hello and welcome to Caesar and Sartre, where two scholars talk about subjects both in classics and philosophy. I'm Audra,
I will.
and today we're going to be talking about the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, on these episodes, we're gonna in the future probably like switch back and forth with topics with our two specialties. And today we sort of just picked Nietzsche because it was an easy topic and we can both rant about Nietzsche for a really long time. Um, and Nietzsche was actually one of the first philosophers I got into when I got into philosophy. So it's an author. He's an author near and dear to my heart, even though I don't agree with everything he wrote or did.
This is a
Anyway,
teenage classic for you. Getting into philosophy through Nietzsche.
it is. Well, yeah, because of existentialism. I feel like a lot of people get into
Yeah,
philosophy via existentialism, and I was like
it's a very easy inroad for
an
edgy
angsty,
teenagers, I think.
edgy teenager looking for meaning in my life, and I was like, oh, there are these people who talk about making your own meaning, and there you go.
Yeah,
And now I have a master's degree in the subject. So
that's a
anyway,
really great summary of your career right there. Yeah, man. Like I just really liked the edgy existentialism, and then now I just have a master's degree. I don't know. It's crazy. It's like
um,
how I got into classics. Like I read Aularia as like a 15-year-old. I was like, wow, that's crazy. And look at that, halfway through a master's program. It does feel that way sometimes.
yes, yes, it does. Grad school could be a topic onto its own, honestly. Um, an episode on whether you should go to grad school, dear listener.
I think that would be really fun to do one day.
It
Meta
would.
episode for all the little undergrads out there.
Um, so, well, I guess I should get into Nietzsche, shouldn't we? Um,
Yeah.
all right. So, Nietzsche was born 1844. He died in 1900, the same year Oscar Wilde died. Fun fact. Um, he was, from a relatively average German family. I think his father was a Lutheran pastor. His mom was a former teacher, and I think he had a line of pastors, sort of back a ways. And as Will Durant, as the historian Will Durant put it, he was a prophet to the end. Our Nietzsche. Um, he had classical education. Well, first very standard German education. Got into the classics later on. Became a philologist, a classical philologist. Um, I'm under the impression it's not really called philology these days, but you can correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Oh no,
But
it still is. The
okay,
thing
because
is, like,
I thought that was an old fashioned term that people don't really
so
use
there,
anymore.
this is something I didn't understand until I took German.
Yeah.
In the German context, they refer to like the entire field of classics as Altphilologie. I think that's how I probably butchered that, but the like as like literally ancient philology, which is like dumb because that's not what the word philology means. Sorry, Germans. But that's just weird. Like we have the broader field of classics in the English speaking world, and then philology falls under it.
Okay. Uh, Thank you for that context. So like I said, Nietzsche became a classical philologist. He was actually like one of the youngest professor. I think he was the youngest professor in classical philology in history.
I know he
Funny
was
enough,
really young.
he got his professorship at 24, which is crazy as someone who's 25. I wish I had a professorship by now. That would be nice, but
Yeah,
uh,
European schooling.
Yeah.
We're just
Um.
stupider. We have like dumb American brains. We couldn't possibly do that so quickly.
No. No, we couldn't. Um. We could also be old-fashioned, and as some people like to do, and say that because we don't have classical education anymore, we're all dunces. Um.
True. That's my take. As you know, I'll never not be elitist about that.
Yes. Yes. So at some point, Nietzsche decided to. Well, originally he was actually going to be, I think, like his father, a pastor. Um, got into classical philology because a big fan of Latin and Greek texts. Um, started to had a couple experiences that like sort of changed his life in different ways. So read some Schopenhauer, which really spoke to him. There's always these philosophers like going into a bookstore, then finding some author that changed their life. But this was Nietzsche's story. He found Schopenhauer, who was kind of a big philosophical pessimist, influenced by influenced and influenced by and from the Romantic movement. Um, Nietzsche also read. What was this guy's name? He Strauss, I think was his last name. So there was this other guy. He wrote like a life of Jesus. But it wasn't from like an orthodox perspective. Now who was that name? Hold on, I can probably find it quickly. Anyway, he eventually starts questioning his Christian upbringing, and as many of us do, became an atheist. David Strauss, I think that was the guy's name, David Strauss.
Why is
Um,
this like the life story of every German philosopher? What is it with all of them like coming from Lutheran backgrounds and then all of them turn to atheism later? Like you almost never get ones that like stick with it. I guess there's Weber. That's like the only one I can think of right off that he. I might be wrong about that. I was pretty sure Weber that he stays Lutheran, right, throughout his life.
I'm not super familiar with Weber. I know he wrote the Protestant Work Ethic,
People
but
shouldn't be. It's just the Protestant ethic. It's not called the Protestant work
oh,
ethic.
Protestant Ethic. Excuse me.
I only know that because it came up in Quick Recall a bunch as a kid.
Okay.
the, the coach
Um,
would always get really mad whenever we messed it up.
but anyway, David Strauss. So he was doing something that wasn't sort of common at the time. Now it's a lot more prevalent. But like looking at the historical Jesus and sort of thinking about the Bible in a historical rather than a purely theological way. Um, and again, this shook Nietzsche to his core, and he gave up Christianity. Except he feels like everyone else didn't give up Christianity enough, which we can get into. Um, just trying to figure out where to go from here. I mean, I'll say a little bit more about his background. I don't want to talk too much, but
You're
um,
fine.
also befriends the composer Richard Wagner. Um, it's just balled away by Wagner's music, which I actually haven't listened to enough Wagner. I mean, I'm I hear him brought up as one of the great musicians of all time, so that's probably correct. I don't I don't know a lot
Yeah, I mean,
about.
I don't know. There's a few things he did. I know there's the Götterdämmerung that he wrote.
Yes, and he wrote
That's a
another
it's a pretty good piece.
opera. I think Parsifal was one. Um. Anyway, so with this introduction to philosophy and like a critical examination of religion, mixed with his major man crush on Wagner,
As we
um,
all have.
you know, no comment, but he his life sort of took a different path than a traditional highly educated German man of his day. um he so his first published work was The Birth of Tragedy, um which again, as the name of the work implies, it's a sort of an analysis of the role of tragedy in uh, the Greek cultural sphere. Um, and he views the tragedy through the lens of two of a spectrum with two dichotomies, I guess you could say. So obviously the Dionysian, um, so very disordered, drunken, um, versus like the Apollonian, so the very logical, rational, gives us philosophy, mathematics. Um, so Nietzsche sees life as like sort of a struggle between those two ways of living, I
Yeah.
guess. Um, and he saw tragedy as as like the art form that allows us to have the perfect mixture between these two. Um, this book was also a political, or had a political message to it, because he was looking for um, a revival of German culture, um, in a similar fashion to, like, the flowering um, of Greek culture. And he was holding up Wagner as one of the people who would bring in this newfound culture. Um,
That really makes a lot of sense if you think about it too. I mean, that's kind of when pan-Hellenic sentiments were really starting to become a thing. Is with the creation of Greek theater.
Remind me what Pan-Hellenic is again.
Pan-Hellene, so like all Greek.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
like Pan-Arabism is like
yeah.
unificationist sentiment among Arabs. The uh, Pan-Hellenic, it wasn't quite. It hadn't quite developed into the idea that like Greeks should all be in one state yet, but it was like hey, yeah, we're all Greeks as opposed to like all those like foreign barbarians. Basically, is the idea. Very similar things were happening in Germany at this time, not coincidentally at all.
Okay. Um,
All about defining yourself as a nation against another.
yes. So a little bit more, I guess, about Birth of Tragedy. So the sort of historical reconstruction Nietzsche is giving, like before tragedy was created, he saw sort of Greek art as more static, um, focusing more on like sculpture, and that being a reflection of the Apollonian mind. Um, but with the Dionysianism coming out through the music.
Hmm.
Um, and then, as I said, with the creation of tragedy, then you can rise, I guess, you can rise to a higher art form. Sorry if there's a noise. My neighbor upstairs is vacuuming. Um, he also thought that uh, the death of tragedy came along with people like um, Socrates, um,
That's interesting.
and
So why do you
Euripides.
suppose that was?
So,
Socrates. Wait, you mean
so
Sophocles?
no, Socrates. No, Aeschylus
Because
and
like
Sophocles.
Euripides is a tragedian. Tragedian. I'm confused as to how Socrates is related.
Yeah. No, no, Aeschylus and Sophocles. obviously the pinnacle, I guess, of Greek tragedy. No, he was those people he was lauding and praising.
Oh, so
No,
he's
what,
like
what was
pitting Euripides against them as like the lower form.
yes, yeah, like Euripides is like Socrates if he were a playwright, is one way of thinking
That's
about it.
interesting because Aristophanes did the same thing at the time.
Yeah.
He in his the frogs, as I assume you're
Um.
familiar, but um,
Yes. And so for Nietzsche, Socrates, Socrates was so focused on reason that he undermined the power of myth and symbolism and undermined this important Dionysian the Dionysian aspects of Greek culture and human life. Um, and
great
that
man,
sorry.
great man type stuff. One individual just single handedly destroyed the entire field of theater.
Um, yeah, I mean,
That feels
I'm sure.
very Nietzschean, just like generally. Sorry, this just popped into my head. I was like, wow, that is the most Nietzsche thing Nietzsche could have possibly said.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could make a connection also with, I guess, just the decline of Greece in the world, perhaps.
I don't
I
know if
mean,
that's true though, because I
Socrates
mean,
as a decadent figure, but
what you are you saying that Nietzsche would say that, or are you saying like you could make that argument? I'm confused.
so I haven't actually read full like the Birth of Tragedy all the way through. So I don't want to I don't want to oversimplify Nietzsche's argument and say he's like one man Socrates rumored it all. I guess what I was trying to say, I imagine he would bring in some historical aspects, like um uh bring in some just the relations Greece had to its neighbors and um losing various wars and stuff like that, and the shakiness of democracy in Athens. Anyway, I guess I was trying to steelman the argument. I would have to go back to the book itself. Um, I mean, but Nietzsche does. I guess the point takeaway is Nietzsche does see Socrates as a decadent, as a
Makes
bad
sense.
sign,
Yeah.
as a like a society is not healthy if it has a Socrates, basically. Um, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, we've mostly been talking philosophy, so I can only offer super limited input on that. But I mean, yeah, like Socrates, that, yeah. I'm just thinking like the most Nietzschean way that somebody could explain the decline of Greek culture from the fall of Athens to like the Alexandrian period. That's yeah. That it just feels very Nietzsche. Like rather than talking about Athens um, getting trounced by the Spartans or anything. It's like no, it's because Athens had like degenerates like Socrates and all of their reason.
Yeah, I mean, and Nietzsche. I mean, he's another one of those. Huh. I was going to say he's one of those irrationalist philosophers. I think maybe it would be better to say he was one of those philosophers who was quick to emphasize the limitations of human reason.
Right.
I mean, I think scholars would probably debate whether how irrational he was. I guess I think some people would still think he was closer to like an Enlightenment project than even he might want to admit. But um, yeah, and I actually this might be good for next episode. I don't know. It would be interesting to look into the classics field's response to the Birth of Tragedy. Um,
Yes, yeah.
I'm
Because
not super.
I think
I know it was
Vilimovitz and
disliked.
yeah, I think Vilimovitz himself actually had something to say about it, which is I think would be fun to interrogate.
Um, yeah, because all I know really roughly is it wasn't well liked by his
Yeah,
his
no,
field, and even a former professor of mine uh, who has feed in both classics and philosophy, he was disparaging the Birth of Tragedy
yeah.
as a work of scholarship. Um,
I mean, I think the problem with the Birth of Tragedy is it doesn't know what it wants to do. Classicists in the modern conception, like especially in the German environment where classics as a field was kind of like as we know it was getting created. It was like right around its inception, really, of the inception of philology. Um, like like what he was doing in that work is like very clearly like it can't really decide where it wants to be. It can't decide whether it wants to be philosophical or philological. It's kind of playing with everything. And
yes.
like classicists, especially at this moment, were really trying to distinguish themselves from philosophers who work with classics, and he's basically doing that, which is very frustrating for people like Vilimovitz and others who are like, no, philology, we need to be we're not here to make like um, judgments about the value of life and meaning and stuff. That's for philosophers. What we're here to do is to do word studies and to create critical editions and to do philological work. We're not we are studying like text in a somewhat scientific way. That's the mindset of philologists at this point, um,
Yeah,
which
I
I
think
think is much less rigid now. But back then, it makes a lot of sense to me that it would have been ill received.
um, I think that's a very good summary, actually, of why the book wouldn't be well received. And because with that book again, you see, so he's shifting away from just like studying classical texts and analyzing them to broader philosophical,
Right.
even psychological concerns. Um, so he ends up leaving academia. Um, he tries to, I think, here or there to get a position in a philosophy department, but philosophers are like, no.
Yeah.
So he never ends up teaching philosophy himself, but he does publish. I don't even know how many books. I mean, he was a prolific writer. He published so much, and he wrote like I think in the last like productive year of his life, he wrote like 3 books. Um, I don't know how someone writes like 3 books in a year, but somehow Nietzsche found a way.
Ask
Um,
the ancients. All those tragedians he loves talking about have like I'm trying to think. I used to know the exact numbers. I think Aeschylus has like over 120 works attributed to him. Um, Sophocles, I think, has over 70. Like, there's the numbers are out there somewhere, but like, it's like crazy to look at how many things. It's like, how I refuse to believe this is just my opinion. I can't like prove it, but I do deeply believe that a lot of these are misattributed because I just don't know how you write 120 plays in a lifetime. Like if there were 120 like trash plays that had clearly had no editing, like okay, but like 120 like I mean, several of which are like clearly well developed. Like, I mean, they're well developed enough that we continue to study them today outside of just their value for looking at Greek culture. Like, we look at them for, as Nietzsche did, for uh, like philosophical and other pursuits, moral education, if you're into that sort of thing. So it's like I don't believe fundamentally that you think that like Aeschylus published 120 plays. That's just crazy to me. But
well,
sorry,
supposedly,
side tangent.
supposedly Voltaire published or wrote 100 volumes in his lifetime. So I mean, not all of a lot of which we would never read anymore unless you're
Sure.
specializing in 18th century French literature. But
I mean, the thing about that is though, like Voltaire lived a relatively full life, right? I'm trying to think of how old he was when he died,
83.
but
Yeah.
like,
82,
yeah,
83.
I don't remember the exact years, but quite a few of the playwrights of excuse me of the classical world like died really young. Like that's a pretty common phenomenon for some reason. Like
I
I'm
thought
thinking right off the top of my head, Terence I think died before he reached the age of 30.
I thought Sophocles lived close to 100, supposedly.
That might be true. I think I do seem to remember Sophocles being pretty old when he died.
Okay.
I think that is. I don't know if he was close to 100. I'd have to look it up, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he lived a good long time. But some of these people were not living very long. It seems very suspect to me that they could publish that many plays. I don't know. It's very suspicious to me. Will never not be. That's just my truth.
Um. So I suppose. Well, I guess that to summarize, well, the rest of his life, I mean, he basically just spent it writing books. Never married. Well, did I think try to get married to a woman who spurned his advances.
Right.
Um, and then he was forever a misogynist. But
Yeah. Again, his personal life very much affecting his philosophy. I think it's it is interesting to like look at some of the things he said. It's just like you know this is not to get overly modern about it, but I mean this does just read like an incel screed at times. Like
yes, that's fair. And so he died young too. Actually, he was like 55. But for
huh,
the last like decade of his life, he was more or less incapacitated because he had
what
like
killed him?
um people used to say it was syphilis. I think that's been disproven by contemporary scholars. I think he had some. So
Yeah,
his
that,
father died when he was young from some brain disease. Um, so I don't think we know exactly what Nietzsche died of, but I think it was some degenerative brain disease. Again, for the last 10 years of his life, he was under the care of his family. He couldn't, didn't talk, wasn't really couldn't think clearly. Didn't talk a lot. Um, I mean, yeah, I don't know. If you look at his life, it's kind of a tragic one, really, if you
yeah,
think about it. But which might be why some pessimism comes through in his writings. Again,
almost
the
undoubtedly.
life and the work relating to
It's
each
kind of
other.
like Edgar Allan Poe, right? Like it's kind of impossible to read his work and know about his life and not think like, yeah, that this is like definitely the depression coming through. But
And then I guess one last thing about his life before we get more into some of his ideas. So he had a younger sister who was a Nazi.
yes,
She married a Nazi. She herself, big fan of Nazis. She actually, Adolf Hitler actually went to her funeral because she lived a really old age, like 90 something.
right, yeah,
Um, and so I only bring it up, not just as a random piece of historical data, but because it is actually important when thinking about his work because she
so
sort
much of
of
it's colored by her. Yeah,
she became like the executor for his work when he became
yeah,
incapacitated, and um, she sort of tampered with his work, tried to co-opt it for like racist and nationalist purposes. Even though personally Nietzsche was anti-nationalist, anti-German nationalism.
yeah,
He was against anti-Semitism, which for the time is pretty remarkable. Um, but yeah, so he has an association with Nazism. I don't think most of the Nazi, like actual official Nazi Party members, really knew much of anything about him or his works.
yeah. Except what they were
Um,
told.
just secondhand knowledge, sort of thing. But yeah, so I do think it's important. I mean, we can get to his politics, which isn't great. But I don't think, we don't want to. Some people smear him as like a proto-Nazi, which I don't actually think
Yeah,
is fair. I think that is more
I agree.
his sister's influence coloring our view of him. Um, Whereas, for all his faults, he at least was not that.
True. That's a good segue actually, because of course I feel like of things to talk about with Nietzschean philosophy, it's kind of impossible to avoid the whole Übermensch Untermensch dichotomy.
Yes, and that's another aspect, I think, of why he becomes associated with fascists, because of course we everyone knows now of this idea of the superior Aryan race. Now
Yeah,
I don't think now in terms of Uber, like the way Nietzsche conceived of the Obermensch, I don't think it was it was not in
no, not
racial
racial at
terms.
all.
It wasn't racial at all, but that idea was sort of co-opted for, like by racists.
Right. I guess it makes sense when you think about it in like the context of the fascist politic, like the idea, like fascists conceive of individuals as like not as individuals, but as oh, what's the word? Like cogs of the machine. They think of the state, the nation, as the organism that we are
mhm.
all like parts of. And so like they saw I think it makes a lot of sense then that Nazis would see Übermensch and think, yeah, of course, our race is we is the greater, and we need to subjugate all of these lessers. Makes sense, I think, within that framework.
Um, so yeah, I mean Nietzsche did want this idea of a higher, or he did argue for this idea of a higher man, um, and that gets into so I think that gets into his genealogy of morals. So, like I said, he became an atheist at a fairly young age, upsetting his mother in the process. Um, and and he wanted to overcome Christianity. Basically, he was looking for a way out of that worldview, and so he gives an interesting, and I think actually quite plausible historical explanation for our contemporary Christian values. Because he contrasts like what he calls master morality with slave morality. And so master morality is like something, an aristocrat would have had. Like they don't take it, uh, they don't take shit from anybody. Pardon my French. They don't,
Right.
they're gonna hit them. They're
Domination and strength is good. We want that. Is sort of
yes,
the idea.
yes, right. Like, and eye for an eye. Like you hit me, you take out my
Yeah.
eye. I'm gonna take out both yours. So like
Other
a
things
sense
kind of
of
fall.
sorry.
Sorry.
No,
I
I
was
was
just
just
gonna
gonna
say
say.
like you can go.
So like with master morality, it's not to say that the I was gonna say the master, but someone who has master morality, it's not that they can't be like generous or they can't be caring, but they choose to be generous or they choose caring, whereas they could choose retribution. Um, so whereas with slave morality, so that's the where this idea of like being meek comes in, or turning the other cheek, because the
Bless those
idea
that curse you.
yes, because the idea is, well, you're a slave, you can't do anything else, and so you're going to
Right. It's like a.
turn the
It's
behavior
like
you
a.
have.
Oh, what's the word? Passive aggressive isn't the right idea, but like the idea is like by accepting your position in society, by accepting uh, the wiles of another, you ultimately are like triumphing over them in some sort of spiritual way,
Yes, very good, very good. So he
which is
so
kind of
he is
how like Jesus really disappointed the Jews whenever he comes and they're he's declared the Messiah, and they're like, okay, great, so you're gonna like destroy the Romans then, and you're going to liberate us. He's like, no, 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 your liberation will be that you are able to make peace with the fact that you are subject to the Romans. And yeah, they didn't like that very much, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good. That's also a good point to add because yes, Nietzsche does associate slave morality, or he attributes it, um, for good or ill, with the Jews who were enslaved in Egypt. Um, and so in a weird way, I guess from a Nietzschean perspective, um, the Jews won. Insofar as they that slave morality, Nietzsche thinks, got passed down
Right,
to Jewish Christians, and then the separation of the two religions ultimately.
right,
And so we have slave morality, and of course Nietzsche's concern is, well, look, if you're going to abandon the theology of Christianity, you should also abandon the morality of Christianity. Whereas when you look at some of the like 18th century French philosophers, like they did not abandon the Christian morality. Like
yeah, no.
Voltaire still had plenty of Christian morality despite not being a believer. Um,
Kant's whole philosophical project. I'm sure we'll make an episode on Kant one of these days. It's a lot to be said, to say the least. But I mean, Kant's entire philosophical project can basically be boiled down to his attempt to give Christianity to an increasingly secular world.
yes, to save religion from reason, I would say.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean Nietzsche wasn't he was not convinced that by that. He wanted. So I've seen some debate among scholars. I don't actually know where I stand on this. Whether he preferred master morality to slave morality, because on the face of it, it's like, well, obviously he preferred master morality. Um, I think the Walter Kaufmann, who's like the famous scholar who rehabilitated Nietzsche, I think he doesn't think that's the case. He thinks that Nietzsche was more offering it as an alternative, as a point of
right.
contrast.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I don't know if I have an opinion on that right now, but
I haven't read enough Nietzsche to have a super strong opinion on that. I always kind of like in my head like to imagine him as like being like an edge lord, just being like, yeah, all these like woke Christians trying to take away my freedom, my fun, and so he's like, yeah, what if I made like a whole philosophical treatise where I talked about how like that's like stupid and how it'd be badass if we were all just like trying to conquer and dominate all the time.
right, right. Um, yeah, and this is sort of why I think Nietzsche's politics are kind of complicated, because even though he wasn't a fascist, um, I think you could make the argument he was kind of a reactionary, but a
Yeah.
reactionary that was looking to the future. Oh, I know that sounds like
No, it
contradictory,
makes
but
sense. Yeah.
um,
There's, I mean, I think that's kind of like, I mean, really, that's what all reactionaries have to do fundamentally. Like, reactionaries, they're reacting to change that has happened in the present. And so they're like, in the future, we need to return with a V and,
yeah,
to
yeah,
whatever. Um, it really, I think, in a lot of ways, he's kind of the genesis of the whole return. This is probably one of his more potent, like, enduring influences on fascism. You know, like fascist movements today don't generally use terminology like the Obermensch or whatever, but like the idea that we need to return to this like version of the ancient world where we will, the where people who are weak will be rightfully subjugated and will have and us, whoever us is, depending on where and who you are, will be, triumphant. Will be dominant in this new hierarchy.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's correct. Um, because I don't know. I mean, politics wasn't his central like interest.
Yeah,
He was more interested in culture, and he wanted. I mean, his concern, I guess, was to figure out well what kind of political system would allow for the most culturally refined people and the greatest artists to thrive, basically. Um,
God, how gay is that? Sorry. I'm gay. I could say this. I mean, like how gay is that though? Yeah. The Übermensch, the people who should be dominating society, are those who are the most culturally refined. Like, Christ Almighty.
um,
Like, yeah, the frillier and the more literature you read and the more classical music you listen to or whatever, that determines who should be on top in society. Like, okay, bro.
right, right.
I think if I said this in my Eastern Kentucky hometown, I would have had like the shit kicked out of me or something. Been called several slurs.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to so a little more detail about his politics. So a big hater on the French Revolution. Thought it was a symptom of what the French
Yes.
call resentment. In my bad French accent. Um,
Wait, how is Weissensborn different from resentment?
I that's a good question. I should know that. Um, I'm not
I
sure.
assume there's a difference because otherwise we would just use the English term.
There probably is, but I'm not actually sure. Well, we can say for the sake of argument, resentment. It's close enough. Um, and that was the other aspect, of course, of slave morality that he thought was so toxic. Was it did bring about a kind of resentment
Yeah.
towards those your superiors, and
It's kind of
you know,
Randian when you think about it, isn't it?
Randian.
Yeah. I get. Did was Rand big into Nietzsche? I actually don't know. But that sounds so much like Ayn Rand.
So Nietzsche kind of, or sorry, not Nietzsche. Ayn Rand kind of appropriated Nietzsche.
Hmm.
I don't know if she
Makes
really
sense.
fully understood him,
Eh,
but she
Many such
borrowed
cases.
she borrowed liberally from Nietzsche's work. Yeah,
She often she had a kind of a penchant for not understanding things.
right.
But yeah, I mean, this sounds a lot like Rand. I'm just thinking like yeah, oh well, yeah, you're not on top in society, but like that's okay. You should be okay with that because like the people who are on top are like better, duh. Like okay,
Yeah. He was not a big fan of democracy. He thought it was
yeah,
impractical and also an extension of like the rabble. The rabble want rights.
mhm.
Um, Also, thought of socialists as negating the will to live itself.
That's crazy because like I'm a socialist and my will to live is being negated every day. That's incredible.
um, yeah, he has the quote. He's like, so yeah, the rising socialist movement negated or was sorry, the will to the negation of life, since one must desire more in order to become more, um, which would lead to the tyranny of the meanest and the most brainless. Um, so yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that checks out.
politically, I don't. I'm not a big Nietzschean. Politically, he would say I'm still a Christian, uh, s-
Right.
drowning in resentment. Um,
I mean, in fairness to him, like I kind of almost agree. I mean, like like it. It's not exactly a secret that Nietzsche was. I mean, Nietzsche, Engels, very different Friedrich, um, was. Um, some of his early writings, he was talking about how the early church was basically primitive communism and so on and so forth. Like, yeah, like socialist ideals do very clearly they do very clearly spring up from a Christian root. I think it's kind of hard to deny that,
yeah, no, I mean,
despite the
I think
best efforts of like ultra leftist types.
no, I mean, I think that is right, and his ideal. I mean, so his ideal does genuinely get away from that because, of course, for his higher man, embraces what he calls the will to power,
Right.
the ability to dominate the environment, um, other people,
Yeah.
um, and he says I have another quote, that the higher man allows himself severity, violence, slavery, danger in the streets and in the heart, secrecy, stoicism, tempter's art, and devilry of every kind.
Yeah.
um,
I think lines like that are part of what like leads me to agree with the position that a lot of it is probably like him being kind of an edgy contrarian. I mean, nobody like sincerely defines themselves by devilry. Like that's very clearly. I think like he's being a little bit facetious there.
you think so? I'm not. I don't know. I feel like
I
he's
don't know. I
serious.
mean, maybe
I
not.
feel like
Maybe
he's
he's
serious.
actually like way edgier than I imagined, and he's like, yeah, like I actually think it's good when people are evil, but I don't think so. Like it's really maybe that's my silly Christianized brain or whatever. But like yeah, I mean I kind of find it hard to believe that he really thought that it's good to be engaged in devilry.
Well, I guess a historical example would be good here, to illustrate the point. So, um, and I'm getting a lot of this. Long ago, I did a research project as an undergraduate, and it included a section about Nietzsche's politics.
I
Um,
remember.
yes. So Nietzsche was a big fan of Napoleon, and I'm just gonna, I guess, read this bit. So Napoleon, like all great artists of government, embraced his worldliness and frankly pursued power. He used conviction and doctrines as tools and weapons, whenever necessary, while allowing himself absolute freedom. Napoleon recognized the necessary relationship between the higher man and the terrible man. The higher man is, in that sense, beyond good or evil. So I mean, it's not that, again, it's not, he's not necessarily saying, like, oh, all the higher men are evil. It's that the higher man isn't constrained by these silly Christian ideas, that
Right.
he's willing to go farther. He doesn't have to necessarily, but he's willing to go, uh, uh, you know, willing to do more or less whatever it takes. Again, to use his will to power to dominate, um, to get his way. And so he thought Napoleon was a big, was an example of one of his higher men. So was the writer Goethe.
Sure. The
So
ultimate
was
Machiavellian.
Caesar. Um, there's a good book actually, that talks about this. So Nietzsche and Napoleon, and Dionysian Conspiracy. Um,
That's an awesome title. I want to
is
read
it
it just for
though?
the
Is
title.
it
That's
though?
sick.
It is. Um, but that, like, it situates it situates Nietzsche, within, like, the political context of, like, Bonapartism, which is really fascinating.
Sure.
So yeah, that's his ideal. Um, Not necessarily a society where everyone has what they need, but a society because he was he was willing to sanction certain levels of subjugation and um, certain classes of people just aren't gonna we're not gonna
Right.
concern ourselves with them. They're the lower orders.
Well, this seems like
Um,
a good moment to hop into his idea of nobility, because like he he has a conception that like the nobility ought to be in power, but also the nobility aren't like the nobility, which I think is kind of
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So I mean, so like Nietzsche was critical of um, like a lot of the nobility of his time because he thought they were like you know lavishly showing people off their wealth and they themselves were decadent and of course we
Yeah,
plenty of architects or
debauched.
not architects, plenty of aristocrats weren't the sharpest knife in the drawer. So Nietzsche's like Nietzsche's not saying well like just take like the French aristocracy of the 1800s and plant it into the 1800s. He want I mean in some ways he wants like a aristocracy like the ideal aristocracy, I guess, the kind that like Plato say might
Yeah,
be interested in like
very
an
very
aristocracy where
Aristotelian of him.
genuinely the best are the ones
Yeah,
in charge. Although it's funny because he does also say that like in one passage, if I can find it, he's not so sure if the where is this? So sorry.
no, you're
Because I think I remember seeing somewhere that he wasn't actually sure that the it would be the higher. I'll have to find the quote in a second, but I think it was the idea that like they're he didn't mind like them being like they're being pencil pushers to like do like the grit work of the government while the higher man is off doing more important things. So it wasn't necessarily a picture of like the higher man would be um, doing the nitty gritty of like legislation. Um, because he did to some extent he did think a lot of politics was a waste of time, which is not an unpopular
yeah.
opinion. But
I mean, that makes sense within his framework. It's all. This is probably another place where he had some influence on the fascists. Is like the cult of action, right? Like being inactive for any period of time. I mean, that's effeminate in his conception. It's action is what you do as a man.
yes. Um, Also a big fan of Machiavelli, although he thought
Yeah,
Machiavelli was like
checks
pointing,
out.
but he thought Machiavelli was pointing toward was arguing for an ideal that in practice you might never quite get towards. But um, so
Yeah,
he saw some practical issues or pragmatic issues with Machiavelli, but in its essence, like as a young he I think yeah he started reading Machiavelli I think as a young student, and actually it's funny he wrote an essay in defense of Napoleon III as a young student. Um, but saying something to the effect that what did he say here? He said. The genius is governed by other and higher laws than the ordinary person, laws that often contradict the general principles of morality and law. He found Napoleon III's actions are irreproachable insofar as he possesses genius and has the best interest of the people in mind. um, so yeah, he does. I mean, he is committed to this idea of a strong man,
yeah.
which has some implications for us nowadays. But um,
Somehow, I don't think he would think people that I'm assuming you have in mind, don't somehow I don't think he would agree that they are Ubermensch material.
No, I don't think so. Um, I think he, yeah, I think his
I feel like he
ideals.
would definitely think of Trump and cronies as effete. He would probably lump them in with like the old aristocracy of Europe, like debauched party mongers who have like no, they don't have any vision for greatness.
Yes. No, I don't think. Yeah, I mean,
A Nietzschean American leader would be like tightening control over NATO or something, not tariffing half the world and um, like making out with Elon Musk.
right, right. Yeah. So no, I don't think we're living through a Nietzschean ideal right now.
Yeah, no. I bet he would probably like Putin. I feel like I feel like Putin is a fairly Nietzschean ruler.
I
What's your
think.
take on that?
Oh, that's a good question.
I mean,
I
it
think
is
that's
true that Putin
probably
hangs out
fair.
with some more debauched, effete corporate leaders. The oligarchs, but like like Putin himself, I feel like is usually working past them towards his like imperial ideal, while
I
also
think
skimming a good chunk of it off the top, just for good measure. Gotta have a little
sure,
graft, but
sure.
it's like he feels much more Nietzschean than Trump anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nietzsche uses this term like artist tyrant.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say like
Philosopher King comes to
it
mind.
would be fair to say that like Putin is more Napoleonic than like
Yeah,
Trump. I mean, even I think
right.
Trump wants to be a Napoleon, but I don't. He's not successful,
Yeah, no. The,
and he's not. He's not
the
building. He's also not.
defining feature of Napoleon, aside from tyranny and killing a lot of people, is definitely competence. It's a
Yeah,
massively competent figure who fell apart later on. Whereas like Trump, I mean, whatever you want to say about him, he's clever in some ways, but not like a competent master of state. That doesn't feel like it fits Trump at all.
he's a
Oh,
clever showman, but not a
yeah.
clever
He's
like.
like he feels like a car salesman. I feel like he's
Yes,
clever in that kind of way. He's very good at like
but he's
deal
not clever in
making,
the.
schmoozing people, but not
He's not
like
clever in the Machiavellian sense of
yeah,
like
no,
manipulating
no,
things
not at
behind the
all.
scenes, or yeah. He would need to be more controlled and less of emotional than that.
Yeah.
Um.
How did we get off on this?
Oh, I think I said something about. I made an offhand comment about strong man being something worse
Oh
than
yes,
right
yes.
now. Um,
Yeah.
demagogue would probably have been a better word, but pseudo
Well,
strong
no, I
man.
mean strongman makes sense when we're talking about Nietzsche, but yeah, Trump is like a demagogue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a topic we can talk about one day, the gadfly and thoroughbred.
Oh, what do you
That's
mean?
it's classical philosophical terminology for like a populist and an I don't know, like an establishmentist, whatever the opposite of a populist is. I actually don't have a term in mind for that for some reason. My schema it's missing a block.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, I mean, in short, I think Nietzsche was like he kind of wanted to return to like certain ancient Greek and Roman ideals, not democracy.
Right.
God, not
Yeah, no, not that one.
not that one. But like you know, he was a big fan of ancient Rome.
Yeah.
Post like
Yeah. He was big on the empire.
big on the empire. Yeah. Um, And so I think that would be his ideal. I think he was kind of one of the first people to, because like I think a lot of reactionaries like are always slobbering over Rome, like how
Yeah,
great it was. We should return to
yeah,
that. Like,
I agree. A lot of that probably does go back to him. Although, in
um,
fairness, I'm sure even without him, a lot of them probably would.
yeah,
There's a lot for a reactionary to uh, slobber over with Rome, as it were. Um, you know, I mean, credit where credit's due. Something I think is kind of interesting. I was talking with a friend about this not too long ago, but like the Roman Republic in like it's really easy to like analyze all the different like city states dotted around the Mediterranean in like an almost pseudo Darwinian way. Like like Carthage basically failed because I mean a few reasons, but one of the big issues they had is that anytime a general lost a battle, they were basically just like exiled, basically every single time. Which, in theory, you could see why that would make sense because, like, yeah, you want to, okay, well, we'll replace them with somebody good, but that's actually not how war has ever worked, like, even once. It doesn't matter how good of a general you are. If you're outmatched in any capacity, it's pretty easy to lose. And what this basically wound up causing in practice was for Carthaginian generals to be super passive because you weren't punished for not attacking; you're punished for losing, so they wouldn't attack. And so then you had like these completely stupid situations, like in the Sicilian campaign, where they would like they'd just be like staring at a Greco-Sicilian fortress, like, nope, ain't touching it. It's like 800 dudes in there. They're like, nope, can't do it, can't do it. What if I lose? Whereas like Roman generals, the consuls were, they became aggressive go-getters because they were really fixated on this idea of like um, dignitas, prestige, because that's what gets you written into the books in Rome. They don't care if you lose as long as you still win. You gotta, which turned out really well for them, and you don't, and the Roman system, the way they had it set up, you only have a year as consul. Well, at least you can't have consecutive years. You have a year, and then I'm trying to remember what the there's a period between terms that you have to have. Um, so like once you get elected, and that shit's expensive. Like you're having to buy up all the votes basically to become consul, especially by the time of the Punic Wars. So like an election campaign is massively expensive. So you've got 1 year to do something absolutely insane so that people remember you. And you gotta go. And so like you would get like Roman consuls, I mean basically constant state of warfare throughout most of the Republic, even when they weren't engaged in fighting with themselves, which was pretty often. They were constantly starting wars with their neighbors and plundering and looting everywhere because that's what you do. That's the only thing to do. You got 1 year, good luck. And they're not going to remove you if you lose a battle. So there's no downside to losing really. So it's just about constantly going out there and doing something. Athens had a pretty similar problem, and I know this digression has gone on a bit. But Athens had a pretty similar problem with it's actually even worse, the ostracism system, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Basically, you have
yeah.
everybody in town gets a potsherd and they get to scratch somebody's name on it, and whoever has the most names gets booted from the city. In theory, I can see why they would do this. However, this ultimately caused people who were getting to be too famous to get ostracized. So then all of their best generals got booted. Probably a lot of the reason that they got trounced by the Spartans. But yeah, so. But yeah, the reason I bring this up anyway is because like I think it's interesting that like reactionaries are so like fixated on the empire when in fact the empire is arguably like when really Roman expansion was stopping and they were starting to, all of that cult of action, movement, all of that, it's gone. Like
Mhm.
Rome's now okay. We rule the Mediterranean now. Now we're going to tax everybody and get fat off of it. Like, I mean, that's basically the story with the empire. I mean, they expanded a little bit, but when they did expand, they were actually highly criticized for it by their own people. I'm trying to think. I think it's Cassius Dio, who's a imperial Greek historian who casts the uh, now I'm definitely going to mix this up. I think it's Septimius Severus, the first of the Severan dynasty, who are kind of known for being tyrants. And he actually kind of liked the Severans, but he didn't like that Septimius invaded Mesopotamia. He was like, "Why would you do that? We had a perfectly secure border. You just went and made a mess for no reason. Like, we could have just continued sitting here and taxing people. What are you doing?" It's like that's the mindset once you get into the established empire. But like reactionaries love the empire as like a concept. I don't know. I find that really fascinating.
Well, I mean, it's a. I mean, isn't it just a romanticization of history in a way? Sort of
Sure,
a.
yeah. I mean, they don't know anything. It's kind of my point.
Yeah.
It's just like it's interesting to me as somebody who studies this stuff to look at like people like Rome posting online. It's like they clearly have no idea what they're talking about. It's like yeah, I want to go back to when some Italians got they plundered the Mediterranean and weren't doing anything. They were just sitting on their laurels basically for most of the time. Like, wow, really, you're really showing that masculine strength. I'm feeling it.
Yeah. Right.
like, like if anything, I feel like they should idolize the Republic, and they don't, because like the idea of people electing people, I guess, is scary.
Even though the Republic wasn't. It wasn't too democratic, really, was it? I mean.
I mean, it kind of it depends on the period. So like
Yeah.
early on, it was like a really like aristocratic republic.
Yeah.
Like the inception of it, the plebs basically had no power. Like it was a few patrician families who ruled everything. Over time, it actually democratized quite a bit, um, and like there's a lot of reasons for it. Not least of which being one of the uh, a very interesting instantiation of a labor strike. Actually, the it's called the secession of the plebs, where literally like the plebs just left town. Like they actually walked out and sat up on a hill, and they wouldn't come back until the aristocracy gave them rights. So that's how they got like the tribunes and stuff. And then the tribune of the plebs actually became like the most powerful office. And Caesar was always constantly trying to get like Caesarian tribunes and stuff. It's a whole thing. But
Okay.
the tribune, like, they have
So
like insane powers. They can veto any law like without any repercussion. Like they're literally like the most powerful man in Rome, aside from the consul. Um, but
so the
yeah,
Republic was democratic enough for the fascists to not like it.
yeah, it's poor people are allowed to do too much. Is kind of their issue. Yeah, it
Wacky.
depends on the period you're in, and unfortunately for fascists, they don't really know anything about history. So like they lump like everything all together, like it's all just one big amorphous blob to them. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, republic like bad, degenerate, gay, whatever, and then they're like empire good, slavery good. Like that's gonna get clipped. But yeah, like it's great stuff. They yeah they don't know anything, I guess, as per usual.
Yeah.
It's all just about the idea of whatever they're thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, and that does tie back to Nietzsche, who is ostensibly the topic of this podcast, although we keep
Yeah,
digressing.
hypothetically.
Uh, because I mean, I think he. his philosophy does strike me as kind of romantic in a lot of ways, not in the
Yeah,
sense of romantic love, but in the sense of the romantic movement.
right. I agree.
And so I think there is a degree of romanticization of history there, um, a degree of um, oh, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I guess that was the main point.
Well, it's kind of
Um,
interesting when you think about it, right?
Even
Like
though he,
a like pseudo romantic philosopher like him, you would not expect them to like Napoleon, who was like very modernist coded. I feel like.
well, I don't know. I mean, there were other romantics that I think did really like Napoleon.
Is that
Um,
true? This is we're wading into waters too deep for me here, but I just I would not imagine them to like him very much because, like, I mean, he's like Napoleon's big on the idea of I am the revolution. Rather famously, he said, he's big on the idea that he is ushering in a new age. Feels very anti-romantic.
well, I suppose it depends what one thinks romanticism is. I mean, I think Napoleon did become kind of a symbol because he was a new force for change in a way. He was a to some extent he was an extension of the revolution. I think in the minds of the
Yeah,
romantics. Um, I mean, I think some people do associate romanticism with a degree of like yearning for the pastoral, yearning for like pre-industrial agrarian times.
right. That's see. I guess that's what I have in my head
Okay,
when I think of
that no, that's
romantics.
not incorrect, but that's not the whole of the romantic perspective
Sure.
on the world, I guess. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, so yeah, that I think it doesn't. It's not surprising that a pseudo romantic philosopher like Nietzsche would, I think, like Napoleon.
Fair enough.
Um, well, because like I feel like also romanticism. I guess we're not talking about Nietzsche much at this point, but I was going to say like romanticism. This is the point of this podcast is the tangents.
Yes.
But you do see a connection with romanticism and like right wing politics. Um, I don't. I guess it's a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely tied in. It's all about the return, baby.
Yeah, a return
What
to
an
yeah,
unhinged thing I
return.
just said.
Yeah, it's weird. Like the return to nature idea, like has I guess it
Yeah.
has political implications, or return to
Yeah.
something, return to something more pure, good, just. Um,
I mean, I think this is kind of like, since we're going off on barely related tangents, like like this is kind of where you get like a lot of neo-reactionary movements that are also like like eco-fascists and stuff. Like they have they have this idea that like progress of any sort, including like the industrial economic progress, that it's all degenerate. That's kind of the idea. Um, and I mean, that's to be fair to them, that is the basically the mirror image of the Marxist perspective. Marx rather famously believing that while capitalism is bad, it's better than what came before, and what comes after will be even better. It's the
yes,
idea of
a
progressive
progression.
perfectionism.
Yes, yes, and yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Nietzsche's a he's an interesting figure, and of course he only touched on the bare minimum of it, but
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess we've been going for about an hour 14.
yeah.
Um, I don't know if there's anything else you want to discuss, Nietzsche related, or
Not right off the top of my head.
um. Well, I suppose we can call it here for now, and I think next week
Sure.
or next episode we were thinking um Also about Nietzsche, but more on the philological end.
Yeah, digging
Um,
into his beef with Villamovitz and
yeah,
others, which
yes.
will be fun, I think. There's
So
there's nothing more fun in my field than just like going through like a commentary and like you can literally like in real time see the arguments that have played out between like individual people. I
right,
remember there was a project I was doing last semester, back in the fall, where like I was going through doing some intertextual analysis on Greek and Roman lyric, um, and the sort of the overlaps between Alcaeus, who is famous for his ship metaphors, um, and reading. Trying to think of who the scholar was. I don't know. This is a famous guy whose name escapes me right now, but he was arguing that the ship metaphor had nothing to do with the ship of state, when it very clearly did, and it was like 4 lines down. It was fragmentary, but you could see the beginning of the word of basileus, king. Like it was about as explicit as somebody could get. But for like in the commentary, he's like, yeah, in spite of Basilius showing up 4 lines down, I don't think this has anything to do with the state. I'm like, okay, buddy, whatever. And I was reading somebody much more modern, somebody from like 5-10 years ago, who was making a comment on that specific commentary. They're like, yeah, this guy's insane. I have like, I mean, they said like in his characteristic pompous style or something like that. It's like, god damn.
that's
They're
funny.
so funny. I love watching philologists get mad at each other. It's really the best thing in this field, because it's like philosophers getting mad at each other makes sense to me, because it's like stuff that matters. Like it's like literally things that like define how we understand the
Like
world. And
truth.
philologists will be beefing over like 4 words in a fragmentary poem from like 600 BC. Like, okay, dude, this is meaningful. Thank you.
Well, on that note,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what we'll be
Um,
doing next time on Caesar and Sartre. So
yeah.
thank you
See ya.
for listening.